under Islamic law, not in Yemen and Pakistan, but in France and in Belgium and in Scandinavia and in Canada and eventually here in the United States too. And they think that what sounds absurd to us, they've got a very good chance of being able to pull off. So I always say to people, you know, if you doubt the thesis of America alone, do what I did. Go to the hospitals in Lyon and Brussels and Vienna and look at who's in the maternity wards. That's the Europe in 20 years' time, if not a little sooner. Or go and stand on, say, the streets of Brussels at 9 o'clock at night, after the middle-aged and the elderly are all tucked up at home watching TV. After dark, it's the young people who are on the sidewalks. And the young people who are on the sidewalks in Brussels at 9 o'clock at night are not Flemish or Walloon. So we're witnessing one of the biggest population transformations, biggest and fastest population transformations in history. The civilized world is in steep demographic decline. And that's the big picture of which Iraq and Afghanistan are in fact, relatively small features. Now, America stands apart from these trends. But America as the guarantor of the planet is a slightly problematic concept for some of us. I had a convention. I like to think the ruddy bloom of late middle age is still on my face, but in fact I'm old enough to have had a conventionally Britannic education, which is to say I learned about the parts of the map that were painted red and about the great inheritance of the British Empire. And if you've been raised as an old-fashioned imperialist, America being the non-imperial superpower is a kind of hard thing to grapple with. You don't quite understand what the deal is here, that America thinks nothing. You get off the plane, any airport in the planet, and you're assaulted by lousy American movies and lousy American pop songs and lousy American cheeseburgers. But America seems far more tentative about exporting its real values to the world. It sees the planet too often as a kind of useful source of franchise outlets for Starbucks and McDonald's, but it doesn't think of what else it might usefully export to those countries. And I think our enemy look at that and think it's very bizarre. You know, between George W. Bush's compassionate crusaderism and hard right isolationism and sort of sappy left multilateralism, which in practical terms is the same as isolationism. It's just that you get to fly off and have a banquet in a European capital every twice a year. Between that, the jihadist figure that America's heart really isn't into being the global hyperpower. And you can't blame them for that, because if you watch CNN International and the endless parade of senators bleating about exit strategies, you would conclude that too. You know, Iran has been meddling in Iraq now for 3 years, and Iran has no plans for an exit strategy. You can watch Iranian TV 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you'll never see a single mullah fretting that Iran hasn't got an exit strategy from Iraq. That's only something that American legislators do, not Iranian ones. I want to use a couple of quotations I mentioned en passant in the book, and I think of them a lot as the weeks go by. In 1898, General Kitchener slaughtered the dervishes, who were the kind of jihadists of the day, at Omdurman in the Sudan. We used to learn this when I was at school. We learned about this as a great victory. Today they would teach it as a war crime. Hilaire Belloc summarized the great power's attitude to the natives very pithily. He wrote, "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun and they have not." And the Maxim gun was the state-of-the-art technology of the day. And that's how we think about ourselves. Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun and the cruise missile and the Daisy Cutter and the ICBM, and therefore we cannot lose. Whereas our enemies look at us and say, so what? They've got the Maxim gun, but they're not willing to use it. They fight with one hand tied behind their back as a matter of policy under the most onerous rules of engagement ever known in the history of warfare. If we hole up in a mosque the enemy's figure, the infidel will worry about pockmarking the walls. If they capture us, they take us to Guantanamo, and every human rights lawyer on the planet and half America's national legislature takes up our cause. So if you've got the Maxim gun, but you're not willing to use it, what advantage is it? And they also figure that they'll have the Maxim gun soon enough. Iran, North Korea, Sudan, Venezuela, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah. The price of entry to the elite club of the most advanced weapons is dropping very, very quickly. It's a lot lower than it was in 1898. It's a lot lower than it was 30 years ago when you had to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council to be a nuclear power. Here's my second quote, which is about a different kind of weapon. Professor Howard Zinn. You probably know him. He's one of America's lefty academics. I know that only narrows it down to 5 or 6 million, but he's one of the A-listers. The kind of guy, like when he's interviewed on NPR, he's introduced in a very kind of neutral, respectful tone, whereas whenever I'm on NPR, I'm always introduced as strident, extreme conservative. There's sort of health warnings all over me before I speak. Whereas he's normal. He's the default position. And in his introduction to one of the apparently endless number of books that Cindy Sheehan produces at bi-monthly intervals, Professor Zinn pens this paean to the plucky underdog. Quote, "A box cutter can bring down a tower. A poem can build up a movement. A pamphlet can spark a revolution," unquote. I'm a man of words, so I agree that poems and pamphlets are powerful weapons, and our side could use more of them. But the only reason, quote, "a box cutter can bring down a tower," is because of the particular environment in which those terrorists produced their box cutters on September 11th. If 19 punks with box cutters tried something in the parking lot of a sports bar, they'd have been beaten to a pulp in nothing flat. But the airline cabin is the most advanced model of the modern social democratic state. It's basically the wildest dreams of big government up there in cloud cuckoo land, in which every single decision and procedure is the exclusive province of the authorities. And as we discovered on September 11th, the state's arthritic 1970s hijack procedures weren't really up to the challenge that morning. So if Howard Zinn is right about the awesome power of box cutters, then it's worth asking whether the key institutions of Western civilization are trending closer to the guys in the parking lot of the sports bar or more toward the sedated, illusory security of those airline cabins on the morning of September 11th. And I think it's hard not to conclude that, in fact, overall, our society is closer to that sedated, illusory security of the airline cabin. So America faces some very tough arithmetic in the years ahead. It's not difficult to foresee, just say, a decade or two hence, a situation where the Muslim world can effectively count on 3 of the permanent votes of the UN Security Council. That's to say, Russia, on present demographic projections, will be majority Muslim by the year 2050. And according to a report in the Toronto Star just a couple of weeks ago, Russia's army will be majority Muslim by the year 2015, in 8 years' time. That's because basically Muslims are the only guys in the Russian Federation who aren't sort of face down in the vodka, so they're the most reliable source of recruits. But that's going to add an interesting wrinkle, not just to the Chechen war, but to the broader geopolitical scene. I mean, we will be in the situation where if we thought it was fun dealing with a Russia that was communist, a Russia that's Islamist will be a lot more motivated than it was under Brezhnev and Khrushchev. So the only way you can buck that numerical disadvantage as Russia Islamifies and Europe Islamifies is if you have will and confidence. And that's where Iraq comes in. You know, the world thinks America is bogged down in Iraq, not because the US military is underfunded or poorly trained or anything like that, but because as awesome as its firepower is, America has not demonstrated to the world a willingness to deploy the other elements of national power. You know, if you think back to September the 11th, on September the 12th, 2001, the Pakistani government took a phone call from Richard Armitage, who was one of the most notorious doves at Colin Powell's State Department. And he lays out what he expects from the Pakistani government, and they're, not happy about it. And he says to them, and if we don't get it, we're going to bomb you back to the